Be libertarian with me for one election. Live free.
That was from the last presidential election. People did not choose to live free by being libertarian. Governor Gary Johnson got more than 1 million votes, but Barack Obama got 66 million. Darn, Johnson would have been a better president. As governor of New Mexico, he shrank government, balanced the budget, and was elected twice in that Democratic state. Good for you. I voted Libertarian in the last presidential election.
Well, and got killed. They got 1% of the vote, 1.3 million votes, but very disappointing when I think that libertarians really speak on behalf of the majority of Americans, which is being fiscally responsible and socially, I don't really care, as long as what you do socially doesn't adversely affect my life.
So you think it's you, or you think it's libertarians?
In the case of politics, it's about money. Obama, Romney each spend $1 billion. I spent $1 million. I couldn't get in the debates because what they said was you had to be at 2% in A, B, C, and D polls. And gee, when you're only in one of the polls, how do you average out to 2% if you're only in one of the polls?
All right, well, let's talk about our 4 current governors who want to be president. Scott Walker of Wisconsin, John Kasich of Ohio, Chris Christie of New Jersey, and Mike Pence of Indiana. If you had to pick one, why are you laughing?
I wouldn't pick any one of them. I mean, I think they're all social
governors.
Well, I think they're all social conservatives, and at the end of the day, I don't think that that flies with America. And so I'm crossways with all these guys when it comes to marriage equality, when it comes to drugs, when it comes to a woman's right to choose, immigration, and military intervention. I mean, Christie's out there saying, make no mistake about it, I am the hawk in this race. So right off the bat, he's saying he's going to bomb.
I think the one most hostile to libertarians is Christie.
This strain of libertarianism that's going through both parties right now and making big headlines, I think is a very dangerous thought.
That strain is in me right now.
The impression is that we're just going to give in and get walked over. And people accuse us of being soft on these horrible people who do want to kill us.
Well, diplomacy first, and
we've been doing that.
I went to CPAC, and at CPAC, somebody says, "You libertarians, you know, you want to sit back, you don't want to do anything." Well, that's dangerous, and you know what? We never sit back and do anything. We always militarily intervene. We always drop bombs. These politicians, they get out in front of crowds, and to be safe, you know, they confront you with some sort of atrocity that has happened, and your response, you know, you can't be soft on this. You've got to be hard. You've got to go out and take them on because there's been a beheading. You've got to go out and avenge this.
So what would you do? These people want to kill us.
They do want to kill us, but why do they want to kill us? Does it have to do with the fact that we continue to drop bombs? We don't just kill the target. We end up killing tens of thousands of innocent civilians who have friends, families, and co-workers. And I dare say that if that happened to any one of us here in the United States, we would vow vengeance against that perpetrating country, up to and including giving our own lives to seek that vengeance. And that's what's going on.
Okay, that was clear. One good thing Christie said recently was that to save Social Security, it must be cut.
I propose a modest means test that only affects those with non-Social Security income of over $80,000 a year and phases out Social Security payments entirely for those that have $200,000 a year in retirement income.
This would hurt me, but he's making sense there. That's responsible.
I completely concur. And if you poll Republicans, they're going to say, yes, we should balance the federal budget. Well, where is Medicaid and Medicare to go along with that conversation on Social Security? Because if you're going to balance...
So Christie is both awful and good.
Well, you know what? Social Security is very fixable, and he pointed out ways in which you can fix it, and in an easy, I think, very equitable way. So that's positive.
You going to run?
I hope so. I hope to do it. You know,
the LA Times reported about the only thing people know about Gary Johnson is he wants to legalize pot.
Well, regretfully, that's what comes when you only have $1 million to spend against $1 billion, and to talk about what really is important to this country.
You think if you were allowed in the debates, you could convince people, then people would understand?
Look, the Libertarian candidate, whomever the Libertarian candidate is, I think is going to provide a very, very viable alternative to Republicans and Democrats, in line with what most Americans, I believe, think.
Thank you, Governor Johnson. If you do run, I'll have to decide whether to vote for you or for this next guy we're going to talk about.
I say let's get the government out of the way so that everyone has a fair chance to succeed and let the markets work again.
Yes. And the betting odds have Rand Paul down in 4th place for the Republican nomination. But, hey, he's doing better than Bill Clinton and Barack Obama were doing this far before the election. A recent poll of swing states found Paul would beat Hillary Clinton in Colorado and Iowa. As people get to know Paul better, and as he explains libertarian ideas, maybe more people will see the wisdom of limited government. Maybe. But some people say Rand is not a real libertarian. The Daily Beast says real libertarians hate Rand Paul. Salon calls him a warmongering fake libertarian. Not that Salon ever knows much. That political compass quiz places Paul squarely in the libertarian box. So what's the truth? Let's ask Matt Welch, who follows the Paul campaign. So he's pretty libertarian.
He describes himself as libertarian-ish. When he first came on the scene, he was a constitutional conservative, and that was largely a way to not scare Kentuckians as he was trying to win a statewide election. He would be the most libertarian president ever.
And he does little things. He spent less on his office.
Yeah, that's not, considering that he would be the boss of 4 million people, cutting your office expenditures by 10% here actually matters. He wears, if you notice, a little like one penny, red penny on his lapel.
I did not notice that.
Check it out next time. And it's all like, if we just cut, 1 cent out of every dollar that we spend on the federal government, you can balance the budget in 5 years. His budgets, which he's released every year, the last several, if you compare them to, the hated Paul Ryan, hated by Democrats, Rand Paul is more serious about cutting the size and scope of government than anyone in the field.
Close the education department, privatize the TSA.
Housing and urban development, he would like to get rid of that. I mean, Republicans used to talk about this stuff in the 1990s.
Ronald Reagan said he'd get rid of the education department.
Right. And then
grew.
And then George W. Bush came around and he doubled it. $18 trillion in debt is untenable, especially when we have the entitlements going to crash around us. He is actually trying to do things about that, including going after, in some cases, military spending as well, in ways that other candidates just are not. And Republicans haven't been from Mitt Romney and going backwards.
So recently he proposed increasing military spending.
By $190 billion over 2 years. My God, he's a fake libertarian. This was a grand act of trolling that he did to Marco Rubio, his colleague in the Senate and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and also candidate for president. Marco Rubio said he believes that we are desperately cut to the bone on military. So Marco Rubio introduced an amendment saying we have to increase military spending by $190 billion in 2 years. Rand Paul said, okay, I'll have the exact same price tag, but I will also propose $190 billion worth of cuts over those next 2 years. It was a way of saying to Marco Rubio, you can't pretend to be a fiscal conservative if you're just going to willy-nilly boost defense spending without coming up with other cuts.
He's pushing a 17% simple flat tax.
Our tax code is a nightmare, and acknowledging that forthrightly is better than not.
So you're excited about Rand Paul's presidential campaign?
I want there to be a conversation about the issues that I care about in this presidential campaign. Some of those issues include the way that we over-intervene in the rest of the world as a kind of default whenever something terrible happens abroad. There really isn't anybody except Rand Paul who is skeptical about things like our intervention in Libya in 2011. Marco Rubio says Hillary Clinton didn't want to go far enough. Rand Paul was saying there's going to be adverse consequences in 2011 if we go into Libya. He was proven right about that.
Horrible things, much worse than Gaddafi.
Yes, and we always forget this because whenever we talk about foreign policy, it's the emotion of the moment rather than long-term thinking. On civil liberties, on things like rifling through our cell phone bills and our cell phones themselves, he is talking a different language, not just of everybody in the Republican field, but of Hillary Clinton too. Hillary Clinton is significantly more hawkish than Rand Paul. She's a lot worse on civil liberties, and on an issue that's really, really important right now, round, 2015-2016, criminal justice reform, where the Koch brothers and ACLU are literally teaming up to actually fix this rotten system that has led to this over-incarceration. The leading person in the Senate has been Rand Paul.
It's exciting to have one non-statist in the race who raises these questions. Thank you, Matt Welch. Coming up, the guy I'm going to vote for. It's not smart to get too enthusiastic about any politician. I've been fooled again and again. I believe Bill Clinton when he said,
"The era of big government is over."
I believe George W. Bush was a small government guy. And Barack Obama? Well, never mind. I'm a libertarian. I want a candidate who's most likely to fight for limited government and individual freedom. To try to find out who that is, I invite him on this show where I'll give him more airtime and less screaming than they get elsewhere. Few come, however, and I can see why, because in a longer discussion they may embarrass themselves. Herman Cain did last election. He came on this show and I asked him what I thought was a simple, basic question. But Cain's answer contradicted itself so much that his enemies used it to ridicule him.
Show the clip of him talking about, no, he got into, show the clip of the abortion. It's just too funny.
So I'm confused on what your position is.
My position is I'm pro-life, period.
If a woman is raped, she should not be allowed to end the pregnancy?
That's her choice. That is not government's choice.
Oh.
I support life from conception.
So abortion should be legal?
No, abortion should not be legal. I believe in the sanctity of life.
I'm not understanding. If it's her choice, that means it's legal.
No. I don't believe a woman should have an abortion. Does that help to clear it up?
Excuse me, is my completely contradictory position too hard for you to understand?
I hate to give ammunition to haters like Bill Maher, but in this case, Maher was right. So I can see why presidential candidates avoid appearances they cannot control. And so far this year, none has agreed to appear on this show, except Gary Johnson, who may be a candidate. And hooray for him. He'd be a good president. I'd vote for him again if I thought he could win, but I suspect he cannot. America seems to be a two-party country. People vote Democrat or Republican. So I plan to vote for Rand Paul. Senator Paul confuses people. Some Ron Paul fans say Rand's not as committed to liberty, but many of their complaints are ambiguous. Has Rand violated his principles? He doesn't call for legalization of drugs, true, but he talks about decreasing penalties, and he doesn't rule out legalization by states. He supported increases in defense spending, but at least he said they should be paid for by reductions in other spending. He voted for sanctions on Iran, which bothers hardcore libertarians. But of the policies under consideration, sanctions were better than war. And Rand wants the Senate to fulfill its constitutional role by approving any war. That's libertarian. Paul disappoints me by opposing gay marriage, but at least Rand did not ask the government to ban it. It's a relief when a politician draws a line between what his religion tells him and what government ought to do. Paul does that. Where he really shines is in the clarity of his plan to shrink government. When elected, he said his big priorities were the debt, and the debt. Good. With America $18 trillion in the hole, we can't afford another big government president. Rand has offered a budget proposal that's visible online that left-wing critics call more radical than Paul Ryan's budget. He would eliminate the Departments of Education and Energy, Amtrak subsidies, foreign aid, other programs that do more harm than good. He'd privatize Medicare and partially privatize Social Security. Those are good things. Paul criticizes crony capitalist subsidies, and unlike other politicians who suck up to Midwestern farmers by supporting ethanol subsidies, Rand merely proposed to eliminate regulations that inhibit ethanol production. That's libertarian. Most politicians just change their so-called principles to fit the needs of their campaign, and maybe keeping things vague is the way to win. Hillary Clinton's website doesn't even give any specific policy position. That's why even liberals should consider this Republican. Rand's criticism of policies that disproportionately harm minorities have been stronger than any Democrats, and he's been more vocal than any candidate in his warnings about civil liberty violations by police, Department of Homeland Security, and the NSA.
We need to go boldly forth under a banner of liberty that clutches the Constitution in one hand and the Bill of Rights in the other.
Sounds good to me. I'll vote for him.